Eleanor, I really wanted to have you on the show because you, well, first of all, let's talk about your documentary, and because we'll get to I want to talk about your music too, because it's a thing that I've mentioned a lot on this show about how big corporations have co-opted even the entertainment industry. So you're not allowed to do any of that. But I want to share this screen with everybody just so people can see it. The Hard Road of Hope, which is hardroadofhope.com. And this is your documentary, which is available. It has won all of these prestigious awards. So why don't you tell us what this movie is, and not only where people can, obviously they can go to this website to see it, but what inspired you to do it, and why aren't you could have taken a big 6-figure or 7-figure gig at MSNBC, but instead you chose the lucrative world of activism, which is
I know. It's funny. I've said to people the past couple of years, it's almost like I've tried really hard to be poor and obscure with the life choices that I've made. Yeah, I mean, we can get to this later, but I was just recently on an interview where they were asking me like, well, why did what happened with your band? And I was like, well, basically I had several meetings with record execs who told me to get bigger tits and to stop writing political songs, write some love songs, and to wear skirts on stage. So here I am.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, you thought your music and being creative and artistic was going to work? No, we need you to get up there and shake it and talk about a breakup or a dance party or a dance party breakup or a party that dance parties breakup. Do a whole album of that, and you're set.
Yeah. So yeah, poor and obscure. And so the film is about West Virginia, which I know some people are like, but actually that is part of why I made it, because I grew up mostly in North Carolina, and like West Virginia is the butt end of jokes there, which something has gone awry if you're the butt end of jokes in North Carolina. So I really I was curious not only to go there as somebody who goes to frontline fights in terms of the environment, because West Virginia is in this crazy intersection of dying coal and the rise of fracking. But I also wanted to go there to see like why has West Virginia become the butt end of jokes? Like, why is it considered to be a throwaway state just filled with hillbillies who don't matter? And what's really fascinating is that it has this storyline around it, predominantly because it used to be the exact opposite. Like, West Virginia's history is radical. Like at the turn of the 20th century, the mine wars happened. It's actually the 100th anniversary this year of the Battle of Blair Mountain, where mine workers came together, black and white and immigrant mine workers came together and took up arms and shot at coal barons in order to win basic labor rights. And they won. They won the right to be paid in American money as opposed to being paid in like company scrip. Folks might be familiar with this song, I Sold My Soul to the Company Store. That's what he's talking about. They weren't paid with actual American money. They were paid with company money that they could only use at the company store. So you're basically like, it's indentured servitude because you can't like go to a different place and spend that money. They won better working conditions. Kids were no longer allowed to work in mines. One of the people I spoke to in the film, his grandfather started working in a mine at the age of 10. Which like I have a hard time even processing that, but that like wasn't that long ago. This guy's like in his 50s and his grandfather worked in a mine at the age of 10. The fact that he even got old enough to procreate is mind-boggling to me. So, and this is the history of West Virginia. And it's this radical history of people working together across culture, across race at the turn of the 20th century, when that was unheard of anywhere, but in particular the South. And this happened in West Virginia, and it's really been buried in West Virginia. And so West Virginia is a home of a radical past and a deeply propagandized and splintered, like more recent history and present. And it's really kind of like it's a mirror to look at the rest of the country and see how we have collectively been propagandized, but also how we collectively have this radical past, particularly in terms of labor rights. And so I think that like the reason that I wanted to highlight West Virginia in particular is because it's such a perfect microcosm of the propaganda that we consume, that we're programmed with, and the radical past that we really have to reconnect with if we want to make a difference in the present and build a better future.
Well, it sounds like you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But no, there's some feedback echo thing. Am I the only one hearing this?
On me, I don't hear it.
Now it's
Is
gone.
it me?
Okay. This is why Lee and I do Government Secrets, is because we just keep learning about story after story after story like this that was hidden from us for a very specific reason. I grew up in Chicago. I did not know about Fred Hampton until 2 years ago when Chris Hedges talked about him in his book and talked about him on the Jimmy Dore show. I didn't know about Fred Hampton. I didn't know there was a neighborhood called Hillbilly Harlem in a city I grew up in. Mm-hmm. And this is the same thing that they've done in West Virginia. They hide in, and it's this, look, it's the same thing. Oh, a bunch of working class blacks and whites and Latinos all got together to say, stick it to the ruling class. They're like, nope, we can't let that story get out. Yeah. we need everybody to think that there's this race war happening 24/7. And it's like, America, the thing that's so I don't know what's the word, insidious, I guess, about the propaganda is it is taking a part of America's, what many Americans like to view themselves as we're the revolutionaries. We stood up to King George and we fought for things and we have all these great rights in this country. Well, one of the things that we have is great labor laws. Yep. Because of all of these labor battles in the early 1900s specifically. And it's the same story. So that of the wealthy coming in and crushing it. And now they buy the propaganda. And that's the narrative of West Virginia. Oh, they're a bunch of a bunch of hillbilly Trump supporters or whatever. And it's like, no, man, they've been screwed over. Like the people in West Virginia voted for Bernie Sanders overwhelmingly in 2016 and then voted for Trump because they didn't forget NAFTA. They didn't forget how Clinton neoliberal policies took their jobs away. Yep. And then I remember after Hillary lost in 2016, Bernie did that town hall in West Virginia. And all these like people who you would think are just Trumpers were like, oh, I'd vote for this guy because they've been screwed over by labor. I mean, literally they know, I mean, in that movie, I forget knock down the doors or whatever with AOC and Paula Jean Swearengin or whatever. That documentary, I forget it, but it was about them all running right before we learned that AOC was a sellout. And it was, she was talking to her mom and her mom was like worried. She's like, there's bodies up in those hills. The coal companies kill people that fight them. You know what I mean? That's the long, rich history of this. And it goes to another reason why, like, why hasn't this story been made by A-list actors in Hollywood? Wouldn't this make a great story? And like, I was shocked that the Fred Hampton movie kind of snuck through because it's like, they don't want to show people working together. They don't want to do that. So I guess it's like learning all this and having this uncovered. What was the experience of the people you interviewed in West Virginia? And obviously you heard about this guy whose grandfather was, working in coal mines at 10. And then sort of the eye-opening, because that's the thing that I love about documentaries is they can really show you a subculture that you weren't aware of and educate you about stuff that you had no idea about and take you as the filmmaker into a place that sounds like, yeah, you grew up with these jokes about West Virginia or whatever. And it probably opened your eyes as a filmmaker. Like when I went to Afghanistan as a comedian, I'd never been with the military. I had no idea what they went through. And that opened my eyes. And going to Russia, the last documentary I did, I had no idea what Russia was about. I had no idea. So like, how was that journey for you? And then for people that you've shown it to, I'm sure you've got, friends and college educated friends on the East Coast who probably have that negative stereotype of West Virginia. How has this movie impacted them?
Yeah, so I think like that, just that question brings up a really solid point, because what the reason that I went there and the reason that I oftentimes have gone to like frontline communities is because I not only want to document, but I also want to help out. Like when I go to these places, I'm like, hey, do you need help with the ground support and the tree sit or whatever? I help out as an organizer as well as a journalist. And one of the things that this, I mean, I was kind of like feeling this before, but this just made it so much more obvious, and it allowed me to kind of put words to it and put, a film to it really. But the idea that like leftist organizers or environmental organizers or what have you will oftentimes go into predominantly white poor areas and talk down to people and treat them like they're idiots and say, listen, this is what you need to know. And, nobody wants to be talked to like they're an idiot. And I think the problem is that we on the left do a really good job of dissecting race and gender, but less so class. And that's really concerning because, in particular, these rural and poor white communities are right in the crosshairs for the KKK. And if we don't reach out to them and try to build community with them, guess who's going to? And I think that that's like something that's very important to highlight, that no matter who you're talking to, don't talk down to them. And this class lens is super important to take with you wherever you're going. And also recognizing that just because somebody doesn't have a liberal arts education doesn't mean that they don't know what it feels like to be oppressed. You brought up the fact that people voted for Bernie in 2016. Why? Because he was speaking to their needs. They know what they need in order to thrive, in order to survive. And when some when some big green organization comes in and says, well, you need to quit your jobs because you're hurting the planet. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? Like, yeah, great. I'll quit my job and then what? Like watch my family starve? That sounds great, but at least I'll save a tree. Like that doesn't scan for people. Like, and it shouldn't. It should, like, people need to be talked to like they're human beings, and also recognize the situations they're in. I don't know anybody who is, like at career day at school when you're in kindergarten that says, I want to get black lung when I'm 40. Like, I don't think that that's a thing that happens. And so treating these people like they're idiots and that they want to die young for the sake of dirty energy is just so stupid. And it's totally unhelpful for building community and actually doing outreach and building these solidarity networks that we need in order to combat the fossil fuel industry. Or like, George Carlin put it, the fact that America is an oil company with an army. So in order to combat that, you really do need to have these organizing efforts that reach out to people that have been propagandized and be able to, and I'm not necessarily saying that like Black organizers should do this, but particularly white organizers, go into these poor white rural communities, sit down on a porch and have a beer and say, hey, you don't trust the Democrats? Neither do I. Let's talk about it. And then like have these conversations, and they will be icky at times, but then you can have these one-on-one conversations. And this is where that organizing really starts to take root. And the activism that is teaching history. Like, it's one thing to say, hey, at some point, sometime, whatever ago, somebody cared about labor rights, like in Wisconsin. But to say that, no, your great grandfather took up arms and shot at coal barons, like that is something deeply personal. And that is something really powerful to share with people that's been kept from them, a powerful piece of their own history. And so I think like it's really powerful to teach that history. And that's something that like, that's probably the main thing that I took away from, and that I learned, is that we have to do better when we go into these spaces and do a lot more listening than we do talking. And, also recognize that these people know what they need. They need like collaboration in getting it. They don't need to be told what that is.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, you bring up such a great point of the condescending plays right into the propaganda that they're fed. And you also, of like, oh, these liberal elites in the big cities think you're dumb, and they want to take your job away, and they want to take your gun away or whatever, and they don't care. They want to outlaw beer and milk or whatever their propaganda that they're fed. And they're fed some crazy propaganda. But then liberal people who watch MSNBC and CNN, they don't want to wake up to the reality that they're fed a bunch of crazy propaganda. I don't know, Russia's stolen everything. Russia prevented Hillary from campaigning in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, I guess. Like Putin turned the motorcade away from those states. Or maybe it was Jill Stein, or probably Angry Burn Bros. I think it was Burn. But that's such so again, like why I'm such a student of history is in history, when you bring up the historical facts, people go, oh, wow, I had no idea. It's like what we're learning about the, Black Wall Street, what happened in Tulsa. Didn't even know that existed, let alone how horrifically it was taken down. So if you were to campaign in those, and the Democratic Party will never do this, but some type of independent candidate or People's Party or whatever should go to West Virginia and say, yeah, your great grandparents shot at coal barons. Because here's the thing. People working in the coal and the fossil fuel industry, they know it's awful. They see the poison contaminated water. They have the black lung. They have kids who've been with, bizarre health issues, and they've seen all that stuff. They would gladly work in a solar panel plant or making wind turbines or whatever it is. But you can't come in there and say, quit your jobs, you're evil.
Yeah.
You got to say, we're going to transition you. Like this is what a real Green New Deal would be. And you make that the cornerstone of the Green New Deal is we're going to transition you at the same, you're making 50 grand a year in the coal mines. You're going to make 50 grand a year moving over to green energy or whatever that is. Because
interestingly enough, the UMWA, the United Mine Workers of America, released a statement, I think earlier this month, that said that they want a just transition. This is the Union for Mine Workers that put out a statement saying they want a just transition away from coal. Like you said, they're well aware. And yes, there are still some people in coal country who feel deeply connected to it. And feel that it's part of their identity. But why do they feel that way? They feel that way because they feel that they've helped to build America, and they have pride in that work. Okay, well then you can also have pride in building a sustainable future, right? It's about taking this pride that has been propagandized and twisted into something really dark and sinister, and putting it into something that could actually, give people the ability to survive for the next 30 years.
Yeah, and you bring up a lot too about the economics of this, and how basically the KKK is a gang that comes in and preys them. It's the same model in the inner cities. There's not a lot of opportunity, and the street gangs in the inner cities, the Black and Latino street gangs, it's the same thing. It's the same thing that ISIS does. There's disenfranchised young Muslim males, not a lot of job, not a lot of opportunity. This gang comes in and says they're the ones over there. They did it. So blame them, and everyone join, and with nothing. It's the same model. You take people that haven't been given a lot of opportunity and have been propagandized. And every American needs to realize they've been propagandized. We all need to accept that. You just ask yourself, who lost the most in World War II? Was not America. It was Russia. It was 20 to 25 million people. So that's the thing that's so critical. And it's such that's why, Bernie doing those town halls on Fox News was so important, and why someone with a real populist message, and it's again too, that the neoliberals and the Democratic Party refuse to acknowledge that Trump, while had many racist, xenophobic things in his first campaign in 2016 and throughout his presidency, did run in 2016. He didn't really do it in his reelection, but in 2016 he ran on a very populist platform. He said, I'm going to bring your job back. And when Hillary was going to $10,000 a plate dinners, he was standing in front of closed down factories saying, I'm going to open this factory back up and I'm going to bring your job back. You could say it was nonsense or lies or whatever, but that was his message. And she didn't have that message. And he was
perceived as different, even though he's of course not. He is the poster child of the totally facocked, 1%, but he was perceived as different. And people remember Clinton. They remember that he kiboshed welfare. They remember the crime bill. Like, they know that he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Like, this is, I mean, people might be goldfish in some aspects, but when you talk about the Clinton dynasty, like literally that's what we're talking about. They're like, no, thanks. I'm going to go with something that seems to be different, or the guy who says he's a democratic socialist. Like, they're totally opposite sides of the spectrum. And I mean, Bernie's really not that left. I mean, coming from Sweden, he's like a centrist, but like, still, these are the options because you know what the same gets you. And so to vote for the same just seems insane. And so you're like, well, I'm going to go for what seems different. And if you kill Bernie, which of course the Democrats did twice, then I guess I'll go with the neo-fascist.
Yeah. Well, what is the reaction, Ben, when you've shown this movie to specifically people in bigger cities, college educated, probably never been to West Virginia, don't know what it's like? Because I've just noticed that as a comedian, having traveled all over this country, and I talk to friends of mine who live in big cities. They've never been through the middle of the country. They don't know what it's like. And I'm like, yeah, you have no idea. When they were like, oh my God, Trump, where did all these racists come from? I'm like, they've been there a while. This has been there a while. And they also have not driven through this country and seen the decimated economics of this country. They haven't seen the closed factories and just towns that are like virtual ghost towns. They haven't seen the opioid epidemic just crush mainly rural areas. They haven't seen that because, drugs have always been sort of a big city thing. So they've never witnessed. I mean, you drive through like Eastern Ohio, there's just opioid crisis, opioid epidemic. I mean, it's all over the place and it's brutal. And these big pharmaceutical companies pushed it. And so seeing how so many like college educated big city people have no clue, what has the reaction been from some friends of yours or even just people in an audience? I know you've screened it at a lot of festivals. It looks like what is the reaction from people who have never been to this part of the country? How are they perceiving it?
Yeah, well, I mean, in particular, the opioid epidemic, West Virginia holds the uncoveted first place of, the top of the opioid epidemic in terms of addiction and death. So it's the third poorest state in the nation. It's the second most rural. So there you go. And so the response, particularly from people in cities, has been far more quiet actually than people who live in like the Rust Belt and people who live in Colorado or California and places that have been taken over by fracking and things like that, because there's kind of like a recognition of solidarity there. I think people in cities have had this kind of, a few people have reached out and said like, wow, I didn't realize that this was happening. This is really fascinating. Thanks for talking about it. But I've also gotten responses that like, why is this important? Which I think is really funny because how is it not? I like on so many different levels. It's important because of the history of labor rights and understanding, kind of like what y'all do with government secrets. You can't understand where the hell you are in the present unless you understand the past. It's like being like out to sea. If you have the map, then at least you can be like, oh, this is where we came from. If you don't have the map, then you're blind and you're just wandering through the doldrums, completely lost. So knowing the past gives you that map, and then you can actually chart your future, like, and make good decisions, as opposed to like, I guess I'll just wander around because I don't understand where I came from. So how can I possibly understand where I'm going? And so from that perspective, it's hugely important, but also just from the eco side perspective, Appalachia is like one of the most biodiverse regions in the world. And it's also at the crosshairs of both coal and fracking. Like, wow, what a massive commentary on our extreme addiction to fossil fuels. And, the attempts at things like solar and wind, which, by the way, would be great on decimated mountaintops, small, localized, locally owned and operated, solar farms and arrays and things like that. But so the question as to why this is important that I've gotten from a couple of people, it really just speaks to the bubble, right? the bubble of the urban lifestyle, the bubble of I have a reusable tote bag and a Prius, ergo I don't need to care about, fossil fuel companies or, wandering through coal slurry on my way to school like a kid in West Virginia. It's this very like, and having lived in LA for 10 years, it's like it was so hard to organize there because of that, because of this perspective that, sitting there in Santa Monica with a little with like a little like a prosecco or whatever, and you're like, I used a glass water bottle today. It's like that you've done your part to save the whales or whatever, and it's like it's so incredibly infuriating because it's all about that personal choice and your privilege to make that personal choice, as opposed to people who live in these places whose choices are Walmart and to work for a coal company, and not looking at the systemic structure in order to understand that, oh yeah, it is 100 companies that are responsible for 70% of global emissions, or the US military's emissions are equal to that of 140 countries. Like we can't address climate change with your Prius and your glass water bottle that costs like $20. That's not going to cut it. And so it really just speaks to these like annoying bubbles of liberalism.
Yeah. When they're just like, just manifest it. That's like a whole.
It's on my vision board.
just put not living in toxic fracking water on your vision board, and then you'll be fine. Just have your wealthy parents co-sign a loan to open an organic clothing store that's overpriced and no one can afford.
It's the mindfulness version of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
It is the mind. They're just not as mindful in West Virginia.
Right?
They just weren't mindful. They just weren't mindful. They just manifest it. Just manifest no more coal mines. Just
put it out there to the universe.
Oh
my God. I just have to tell this story because it is the most LA thing I think that I've seen. So I went to visit. This was probably back in 2018. A couple of years after I moved, and my friend and I were about to go for a hike, and so we stopped off at this juice place because it's LA, and to get like a snack before we go. And I just saw like along the wall there's like a variety of faucets, like 5 different faucets that all have little signs on them. One says like prosperity, one says love, and I was like, what the hell is going on? And this girl walks past me to one of the faucets and starts filling up a water bottle, and I'm like, I gotta know what the hell this is about. So I walk up to the cash register, and I'm like, excuse me, what is going on here? And she's like, that's our intention water. And I was like, wait, what? And she's like, so we have ceremonies around the water where we bless it with intention, and then you can buy that for your own use and your own intentions. And I was like, that's LA tap water, right? Like, can we? That's just straight up LA. Like, you're not even putting that shit through a filter. And then she's like, well, we've held ceremony around it, and I'm like, okay, this is the most LA thing I've ever heard in my entire. And people are buying it, and it's like expensive.
So, if I hear you correctly, you're saying Flint, Michigan just should have had one of these ceremonies? Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
Yes. The intention there would have been clean, and then I think we would have been okay.
Just make clean water your intention. Just say, I want authentic water. That's
if you run it over a crystal, then
oh God, the crystals. Oh, it's weird. The crystals didn't cure COVID. I thought the crystals were going to cure COVID.
I just don't think that you you need to use them as an enema, Graham. So if you just really shove it up there.
Okay, great. What a great intention. Take this crystal and shove it up your ass, you dumb hippie. Well, I'm here with Eleanor Goldfield. Where can people see this movie, your documentary?
It's at hardroadofhope.com.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Please hit the like button, the subscribe button. Go to patreon.com/Graham Elwood and rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, where you can support the show. Also, I have a Bitcoin wallet, a Bitcoin Cash wallet, and an Ethereum wallet in the show notes. We're taking cryptocurrency. I have a Coinbase affiliation link. We're going to be getting on some other exchanges. So that's how you support the show. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. YouTube is unsubscribing us at an alarming rate. I have a PayPal button at grahamelwood.com. I even have a Venmo at Graham-Elwood. There's a lot of ways to support our show. We are getting crushed by YouTube. We've dipped under 73,000 subscribers because of YouTube. Thanks for supporting what we do.